Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Lisa. It's really wonderful to be here and a privilege to be amongst this amazing cohort. Who thinks we have some of the best minds in the world here right now, yeah? I'm flabbergasted. And I was saying last night that the opportunity of these kind of activities is we don't just get that fleeting moment where someone stands up and we go, oh, that's great, and you're running after them in the corridor saying, can we catch up, and then it's done. You go, that's okay, I'll see you tomorrow at breakfast or at lunchtime or tomorrow evening. It's a chance to really immerse ourselves in the amazing relationships. So what I'm going to talk to you over the next 45 minutes. There's a heads up of how long it's going to take. If bathroom breaks are needed, please come and go as you please. I'm going to talk about decision science and decision making. And I do wonder why I have a slide with a picture of me on it, because I'm here and you don't really need that. But anyway, just a little bit about me. And actually, I tend to say I'm not in the technology world because I'm not. I'm in the world of decision making, and it's people that make decisions. It's not computers that make decisions. And then I forget, actually a long time ago, I did have a tech startup in the world of location-based services. Anyone remember when phones didn't have color screens and could display 2 lines of text? And you don't have to put your hand up because I realised that immediately dates some of us. And it was fascinating hearing the panel earlier, because one of those moments in history of technology where it was all about what the market did with the technology that drove the future was SMS, the short message service. This was a piece of technology that was built by the engineers into the new global system for mobile communications to test the network. Yeah, we can put a sort of message in there. What happened to SMS? It's what we live by today that's turned into all these amazing text messaging services because it was used that way, not because it was intended that way. And I think that's a good context for us to think from, particularly to George's point. Someone had a passion for that as an engineer. Someone else saw a different way of using it. It got used that way, and now we have what we have today in terms of how we communicate with each other. So what a paradigm shift that you could say was unintentional. And so I think that's a bit of my technical history, my physical history. As Lisa points out, I'm part of the Australian Massive. I live in Sydney, Australia. I used to live in Auckland in New Zealand. Anyone here from New Zealand? I don't think we have any Kiwis in the room. Yes, excellent. Kia ora. But prior to that, I was living in England, and so I like to think of myself as quite English, but actually I realise I sound like I'm a bit of a mash-up, so apologies for that. I've been doing what I do for nearly 20 years now, and that really is, I'm on a mission to transform the way the world makes decisions. I see so much poor decision-making going on. I really decided I can't stand by and let this happen when there are much better ways of making decisions. So the opportunity for me today, I guess, is to have another impact on the world. So I'm committed. My purpose is to transform the way the world makes decisions because I see a future one day where everyone has a say in decisions that matter to them, which means you have a say in the decision about whether your city gets locked down in COVID. You have a decision a say in decisions that matter to you around your identity, around your data. That's the future. Now, what's awesome about this conversation and where we are today is technologically, we now know that's entirely possible. When I've said that before in the past, people have said, yeah, that's all very well, but you can't do that. You can't have millions of people participate in a decision. Yes, you can. And I know that we can do it today. Anyway, what am I going to cover today? Really, my intention is to help us move from really where most of us make our decisions today. We make tens of thousands of decisions a day, and mostly they're unconscious. They just happen. We find ourselves somewhere. Something's happened. It's, oh, how did that happen? How did I end up wearing this suit? How did I end up? It's unconscious. Now, that's very helpful for most of our decisions because if everything was conscious, our days would go very slowly. But for many things, the unconsciousness of decision-making is a big issue. So the opportunity today, and really what I want to cause a conversation about, is how we can move to decision-making by design, where we start to say what happens in decisions that we're making. Quick question for everyone, and I want to make this as conversational as possible. To keep it on its toes, we won't be passing the microphone around, so please just shout out. But when I say decision-making, who here thinks, oh yeah, that's hard, decision-making's hard? And I know some of you have said to me, I've got some hard decisions to make. So, yeah, so what is it about decision-making that makes it hard? Just shout out a couple of things. The outcome, so as in being clear on what the outcome is? Yep.
Too many choices.
Choices, too many choices? Commitment, oh my goodness, if I make that decision now, is it going to stick? Anything else? Opportunity cost, the relevance of data. Do we have enough data? Do I have too little data? Sorry? Yeah. Oh, and I forgot to say, by the way, I'm deaf in one ear, which kind of so what, except it means my hearing's not directional. So what really helps for me is to wave a little bit when you speak so I can look at you. Otherwise, I'm going to be looking over there and someone over there is speaking and I've no idea who said it. So lots of things make decision-making hard. And of course, these are some I first thought of. Cognitive bias, anyone know about cognitive bias? Yeah, we're all biased, whether we like it or not. And the big mistake is to try and say, let's become unbiased. Do you think that's ever going to happen? Absolutely. We want to embrace that bias and make sure how we're making decisions accommodates for that. Too many options. I think we heard that one earlier. Lots of stakeholders. People saying, I've got a stake. It's my turn to have a say in this. Again, a challenge, something to be embraced, I think. So there's lots of things that make decision-making hard. And I've got a few myths I'm going to try and bust a bit today. So one of the myths I want to try and bust is, so decision-making is hard. So what's a good decision? When you see a decision, you go, great decision, that was a good decision. Is there a definitive thing that is a good decision? And I won't. Okay, so a good decision is you make money. And let's imagine you making money means I lost money. Is that a good decision for me? No, exactly. So great decision for you, not necessarily for me. Pretty much any decision you can look at. George, you were going to say something. Yes, exactly. So you could say good decision means there's a majority somewhere that's won or benefited and a minority somewhere that's lost.
But it also depends on what you maximize on, right?
The short answer is, because we could have this conversation for the next 45 minutes, my view is there is no such definitive thing as a good or a bad decision. And part of the challenge in decision making is we all want to go, I want to make better decisions. Actually, I'm interested in having decisions better made. In other words, let's focus our attention on how we make the decision, not whether it's a good or a bad outcome, because with a well-made decision, we'll get to better outcomes.
In alignment with your intuition.
Exactly. So how we make the decision is the key thing, and one of the ways we want to make those decisions is lining up our intuition and everything else. That's what I'm going to go straight into. Perfect. Have a think for yourselves as we go into this conversation. And I just realized I'm not watching the time, so I'm assuming that Lisa's going to be watching the time for me. I'm going to hurry me up. Perhaps you can give me a 10-minute and a 5-minute at the end. Thank you. Have a think about what you want from this conversation we're about to have. So one of the places you could look is maybe what are some of the decisions that you can see coming at you, decisions that you know you might have to make, decisions that you have made, decisions that someone else might have to make. Where are their decisions? And you could say, what's all that got to do with this environment of Web3? I've heard lots of decisions that people are facing. Just from the cohort presentations today, some of you are facing decisions about technology development, about product roadmaps, around investment, around partnerships. I can hear decisions all over the place. I suppose that's because the way I walk through the world, all I hear is decisions. So have a think about some decisions that you are facing. Because the more this conversation we're about to have fits into what you're dealing with, the more valuable it is for you. And that's my commitment here today. This conversation is entirely about what's helpful for you. One other thing that I hope is going to be helpful for you, here's my book. I've got a copy for each of the cohort companies. I brought it by hand from Australia, which meant I couldn't bring enough for every single person in the room, so I apologize for that. But please make sure, if you're one of the cohort companies and you haven't got a copy yet, come and see me or Hayley at the back of the room. Give us a wave, Hayley, and we'll make sure you get your copy of the book. The other thing, actually, Hayley, can you just do me a favor? I completely forgot. In that bag just down sitting there next to Chris, there's my coasters. If you can just distribute them around the table. Something else I just wanted to give you to connect with the conversation we're having. Let's get into this. I didn't translate very well. So we say decision science. Who here has heard of decision science as a discipline? Yep, a few people, but not many, right? So decision making is a thing. And it took me marrying an American woman to even know what a thing was. So when she said, you know what a thing is? I said, what's a thing? She said, a thing's a thing. What, a thing? And then she said, decision-making's a thing. I said, okay, if you understand what that means, we'll talk about it. So decision-making is a thing. It's a place. It's a discipline. It's something that we do that we can put our attention on and therefore improve our outcomes. And really, the world of decision science is a interdisciplinary application of other disciplines, maths and economics and physics and psychology, sociology, a whole range of things wrapped up together with the intention of looking at how do we make decisions? So if we can start to think about how we make decisions, perhaps we have a chance of improving our decision outcomes and making our decisions better. That's the game that we're playing. So that's decision science for us. And just a quote, I've written it in my slides so that I don't misquote it, but if we actually do a quick Google on decision science, the fundamental of decision science tells us that coherent decisions, and we carefully use the language coherent versus good, coherent decisions are made by a combination of the value associated with an outcome and the probability of achieving that outcome. Okay, well, that's pretty straightforward. As long as we can identify value, we can assess probability, perhaps we're winning. Thing is, both of those are subjective concepts. And the first myth I want to bust, I'm just going to write it up on my flip chart. The first myth I want to bust, so you can't take the consultant out of me, can you, is the objectivity myth. This is that we need more objective decisions. Give me a decision that's based entirely on data with no intuition, nothing in it, just objective. That's the best decision, isn't it? But when we make a decision, what's impacted? Is it the past or is it the future? It's the future, right? We're trying to make a decision about how the business is going to go, what we're doing. Is the future yet written? I guess we can have a totally philosophical conversation, but let's take a given, the future's not yet written. So any decision is about something that is subjective, our view of the future. So there is no such thing as an objective decision. That's the objectivity myth. And if we can embrace that a bit, we have a lot more freedom in how we go about decision making, because we get paralyzed often trying to get more data, trying to drill in, trying to understand more information. Okay, given that we're putting that myth on one side, let's look at how can we improve our decision making. And fundamentally what I want to cover with you today really is a way of thinking about decision making. I call it decision thinking. Anyone who recognizes a relationship to design thinking, it was not entirely coincidental. I think I was having a conversation at lunch about there's nothing original in music. Of course, that's the whole point, right? We build on ideas. Thank you, Stanford. Decision thinking, the idea that if we can make more conscious, more structured, more transparent, and more collaborative decisions, we will get better decision outcomes. Now, next myth. I've talked about decision-making being hard. In fact, I even have hard decisions in the title of my book. But really the hard bit in decision-making isn't making it, because we could toss a coin, we could run an algorithm, it would say you should turn left or turn right. So what's the hard bit? It's having the decision stick. It's having it live in the world. It's having, when we get to a decision and we say, yes, I'm going to do this product, it's then following through on that and turning out the results. So actually the place I want us to have our attention on is what does it take to have these decisions that we know we need to make exist, stick, and last in the world so they turn out the results that we want. And what I know is, I guess, and what I should have said at the beginning, and just to be straight, I'm coming from 20 years of practice. I'm not an academic. I'm not here with 4 PhDs. I'm here from what works out there in the world. As Lisa said earlier, I've worked a lot with governments, a lot with large corporations in how do we make decisions that stick so that they live in the world. Let's bring some decision thinking. The thing about decision thinking, and the reason hopefully the coasters are making their way up, you just distribute them around. Hopefully there's enough for every table. And these are just a little aid memoirs for you. The thing about this, what really works, and I know you all know this because of how you look at your businesses, is to get to some principles. I can tell you all the frameworks and models that you like, but if actually we've got a few principles we can carry in our heads, we've got a chance of making a difference and transforming the way we make decisions. So there are 4 core principles to decision thinking. The coasters you've got, there's one coaster for each of the 4 principles, and they're articulated on the back, but let's explore them. And one of the reasons I wanted you to have some decisions in mind is I want to talk about how does this look in practice in your world, in the kind of decisions that you're dealing with. Okay, the first principle, process before content. Let's put the horse before the cart. What do I mean by that? Normally, the way decisions come about us is someone says, I've got a great idea, do you want to invest? So the decision is now, do you want to invest in this idea? We haven't thought through, what if that idea comes at me what might be my way of approaching that decision? And immediately we're emotionally connected to the thing. The person's given us a great pitch. We like how they talk. We're already biased towards a decision outcome. We've got no way of stepping back from the decision and making a process. And of course, if that decision, which they always do, impacts multiple stakeholders, we've now found ourselves stuck with, it's right in front of me, what do I do? So first principle is get clear on the process before you make a decision. What is the process I'm going to use? One of the great reasons for doing this is it's easy for us to agree on a process for making a decision. Yeah, we're good with that. Yeah, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to have a model, whatever. What's hard is for us to agree on the content. In other words, should we go left or right? So if we can step away from the content and concentrate on the process, we're going to have a much better chance of engaging ourselves and our stakeholders as we go through our decision. So that's the first principle. Process before content. It really will help us start with agreement. As we know, the best way to make decisions is a series of agreements rather than one big bang head-to-head. I'm going to look at Mark because I know he's a Brit. My hypothesis and my decision analytic friend's hypothesis is Brexit was such a failure because it started with an entrenched position. It didn't start with let's have a conversation about this concept of leave or stay. It was two headline people who said, over my dead body are we staying? And someone said, over my dead body are we leaving? And they started with content with no sense of process. So had we had a process conversation, we could have had a much better outcome for Brexit, because of course the results don't seem to have been good for anyone, however we look at it. So that's why we want to do process before content. It gives us some common ground, and really it helps us avoid this getting stuck or paralyzed or making a default decision that presents itself. So, thinking of some decisions that are going on in your world, what can you see about process? What pops into your head when you think about a decision process? Yep. Got it. And one of.
I know I'm wrong, so that's what I meant. Like, so
and exactly. And you've noticed for yourself your own bias towards And as soon as we hear the word groupthink, because I don't hear anything good in the word groupthink. No, right? We go, oh man, that's a group of people all standing around, spending days on end, talking in circles. Eventually, that's the worst thing that we want. Totally agree. And that's not what we're talking about here, but it's what looks like it did. Thank you for shining a light. And the third principle, we'll talk to that more specifically. So yeah, what do you think a process could look like? Process could look like, here's some people to be involved, here's how they're going to be involved, here's the points in a decision time frame. Now, if you're buying, the Australians in the room will laugh at this one, and you may have heard the global headlines, but if you're choosing to buy a submarine, which is, I thought they'd laugh, which is a $50 billion decision, so not an insignificant decision. So you might want to have a process that takes you a year to make that kind of decision. That's valid, that's requisite. But some of the decisions we're talking about, a process might literally be 10 minutes worth of conversation and we've got to a good decision. So don't hear process as, oh good, we've now got to hire, shouldn't have said that word, that's unfair. We've got to hire, let's say, a high-end consulting firm to design this big process for us. So don't hear that. Process can be simple, fast, or it can be long and elongated as needed, as requisite for the decision. That's the first principle. The second principle is academic rigor. And there is an irony in this expression because when my book was being reviewed by an academic, he said that term doesn't actually make sense. Sadly, a lot of the merch was already printed. I was like, okay, I can just stand by the unrigor of that term. But the principle of academic rigor is really what can we bring to our decision process to ensure that we can stand behind it and put our hand on our hearts. So let's bring decision science to the decisions that we're making. And let's make sure we delve into a couple of things I really want to highlight in the world of academic rigor. And if anyone can see my... a little test for you, and I won't put it on the spot, I'll leave it with you, but why I use the graphic of a fish sitting on a pair of scales. Anyone who is a decision scientist would probably get that. It's a little bit of a decision science, boring joke. I'll give you the answer later. But here's a couple of things. Firstly, let's make sure when we're making our decision, we are encompassing the spectrums of decision science, not just going, it's just a statistical decision, we'll just add up some numbers and there's our answer. What about the social dimension? What about the intuition? What about, let's make sure we bring that into play. And let's make sure we use numbers in a way that is valid. Now, here's another myth that I want to bust. Data is not value. And in a technology conversation, it's tricky to have, I guess, be bold about that because we want more data. Yes, the more data I've got, the more clear I am on the right way of course of action, the best outcome. And the risk is, and this happens all the time, is that we take data and we go, that's value. This new car I might buy, this one is twice as fast as that one. Does that make it twice as good? No. This car has 4 wheels, that motorbike has 2. Does the car twice as good as the motorbike because it's got 4 wheels, not 2? No. But lots of decision systems and processes have that inside of them. Adding up numbers that have no, let's say, validity being added up and assuming that the data is the value. We've got to get clear on what value means and relate that to the data. So think about the car. Yeah, is it really twice as good? If the speed limit's, I don't know, 80 miles an hour and my car can do 160, is that any better than a car that can do 120? Probably not. And that talks to another point that I want to, it's not a myth, but I want to put it up here. Context is critical. Context is decisive. In fact, I was having a conversation earlier. I love the panel this morning. I go, God, I wish I could talk in those power phrases. And I can now hear myself with all these power phrases coming out. Context trumps content. Because the context for my, and people keep telling me that my commitment to diversity, I should stop using car examples because I've realized that they're a bit male gender biased, so apologies for that. My car example, 160 miles an hour, is that twice as good as 180 miles an hour? If the speed limit's 40, no. If the speed limit's 200, maybe it is. So the context of the speed limit I'm operating in is critical to me to understand how much I care about how fast my car goes. So we've got to understand our context. I didn't know this. I knew the story about Betamax being lost to VHS. I didn't know it was porn that did that. I was working in a store selling electronic goods when exactly that happened, and I was like, oh, but Beta's such a good technology. Yeah, everything about it was better, and then all of a sudden it had gone. So the context in that environment trumps content. We've got to think about the context, and we can work on the context more than we want to work on the content. Anyway, academic rigor is dealing with context. And why? We want to make sure that, and this might seem counterintuitive, we want to make sure that decisions feel right. When we get to the end and we're committed and we're moving forward in a course of action, we're never going to do it if we actually go, oh, it doesn't feel right. We know our natural self will have us shy away from that decision. And so I'm talking about feeling in the world of academic rigor, but actually the rigor on which we can use in our decision making will help us improve how we feel about the decision. And like I say, value and data are different. Let's not get data collapsed with value. And of course, data informs value. Next, and here's the reason, okay? If we don't do this, if we don't bring academic rigor, we don't trust our decision. And of course, when you start looking at governments and so on, then no one trusts the decision, and who knows what happens as a result of that. We've seen all sorts of impacts. If we do, we get much greater confidence in our outcome. So that's going to help us. Okay, the next principle, to George's point earlier, is active stakeholder participation. Now, I was going to say there's 3 keywords up here. That's a bit obvious, isn't it? But probably the keyword for me is participation. And now, we might hear what that looked like as groupthink. Let's get everyone together in a nice focus group and say you each get 5 votes and your votes add up and there's the answer. That's not what I mean, and in fact, we've got to make sure that we don't end up there. Otherwise, we end up with decisions that no one owns, no one believes in. So how can you participate in a decision process? There are lots of different ways, and in fact, one of the keys here is be able to participate in a way that works for you, a way that works for you as a stakeholder. And that might mean I get to vote on something. It might mean I get to come to a workshop. It might mean I just get to review something and say, yep, my participation is I knew what was going on. So the key here is to get involved in the world of the stakeholders, and that was the wrong button, in the world of the stakeholders and understand how they would like to participate. Social and group participation is so valuable to us in terms of making decisions. And now when we look at, and I was talking to Amanda over lunch, we look at the world of the DAO and the opportunity that has for us for massive participation in decision making. That is so exciting. And my commitment is we've got to do that grounded in some decision science so that where we end up with is people's experience going, even though the thing the group decided on wasn't what I wanted, I'm still satisfied with that. That's actually the crux of this whole challenge. Because we know, right? Who here, I shouldn't ask who voted in an election. If I ask that question in Australia, it's compulsory. So if someone didn't put their hand up, they'd be in trouble. But you know what voting in an election looks like, and you know your experience when the other person got in. And you're like, didn't vote for them, and I'm probably now going to spend the next 2 or 3 years grumbling about what the person who I chose didn't get in did. The challenge for us is to be satisfied even when the decision didn't go our way. So there's a few conditions that matter for us on this. And in fact, I'm just going to write them up here. One of the conditions that matters, and we've talked about it a lot, the word came up earlier. Transparency. If I can see how the decision's made or going to be made, I've got a line of sight into that, then I can at least go, okay, I agree with how that's going to be made. I can see I've got transparency. The next thing that matters is accessibility. Because it's all very well to say, let's participate, and then the way you do that is through, you've got to hold this particular cryptocurrency to be able to vote in this particular thing. Is that accessible to me if I don't hold it? No, it's not. So am I going to believe in that decision process? No, I'm not. So it's got to be accessible. And I deal with this at the very human level of how are you going to have people in a room in a COVID lockdown? Is that accessible to you? How are we going to have people participate in an audio conference who have a hearing impairment? That's accessibility there, but of course, right at the technology level, it can look like, do you even have the right platform? Do you have a mobile device? Who knows? So it's got to be accessible for true participation. And then finally, it's got to have rigor. Because if I'm going to trust it, and I want to look under the hood and go, how did that come together? Oh, you added up a few random numbers and then you gave it to the person you first thought of. I'm not going to support or trust that outcome. If we've got those 3 conditions, we work out how our stakeholders can participate, we will get decisions that stick. We will get people to say, okay, I'm satisfied. I can see, even though it didn't go the way I wanted to build a new school, the government decided to build a new hospital, but I can see why the hospital is the best answer, and that's okay. So we want commitment to carry out our decisions. So just a quick question. Who can see, looking at active stakeholder participation, what that might look like in your world? Any thoughts, interesting ideas, reflections? Mark?
Yeah, I've got some thinking. It seems at the moment, and I know you're finished, but it seems like quite a binary thing. It's either a yes or a no, it's a 1 or a 0, it's either right or wrong. I was just wondering, and this may be a question for the end, but it was just thinking on how perception and taste from a person, their standpoint of entry, how they were brought up, how does that impact if they want to make a maybe rather than a yes or a no? Say if I want to leave the decision as like an open thing, so it becomes a maybe. At what point does that maybe become correct if it's right, or incorrect if it's wrong? Does the outcome affect whether or not this decision was right or wrong? I don't know, it's just a grey area. And it just seems that there's a lot of binary stuff coming through at the moment. I was just wondering if that grey area exists in your thinking.
Great question, and so thank you. And tell me if this isn't answering it, because I might talk in a little bit of a tangent, but you talked about binary. One of the things that helps us, and anyone who understands the neuroscience will know that our brains are very good at making comparisons. We're very poor at making absolute decisions. Given a yes or a no, our brains are not really well geared to engage with that. And actually, the yes or no can be a very poor way to make a decision. Our brains are much better if given a range of options. And that might look like yes, half yes, a third yes, almost no and no. Or it might look like no today, but yes in 6 months, no today, but yes in 10 years. So it could look like over time. So one of the ways that we get past what you're talking about is to start saying, let's provide some alternatives in our decision that give us a range of things to compare between. The trouble is we know decisions don't normally present themselves like that to us. As we go through the world, someone doesn't come up and say, here's 5 amazing things, what do you think? What happens is a VC comes up to us and says, I love the look of your business, can I have a look in on the first round? Okay, that's a decision called, do I get a look in on the first round? And part of our job that can really help us is to say, what might some other options look like that give us a better place to start to compare things between each other? So creating more options rather than making it a black or white, yes or no, can really help us in that situation. Lisa, sorry, are you going to tell me about timing? No. So the answer is yes, and I'll come to that in just a moment, okay? Because that's going to bring together some issues. And actually what I want to do is a very little workshop with a particular decision, and Maria's given me permission to talk about a topic that we talked about over lunch, and I'll probably talk to the car at the same time. But thank you. George, you had a question?
I'm fascinated by this, right? But my particular neurodivergence disallows a lot of this stuff.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And then but I think about Amanda's work, et cetera, and what I like about the current state of technology is the proof of stake kind of decision making.
Yep.
Right? Where if I'm part of a DAO or whatever, then there's an implied value there, right? And then if I'm willing to put things of value to me, stake them for risk, and the more I'm willing to stake, then the more my decision matters, right? Now I understand it's a hugely cynical thing, but I'm also so I intuitively don't trust anything or anyone, right? Nor should I, right? And so I'm curious about layering this very humanistic kind of approach, and I do know the Stanford decision science, but so I'd like to hear you and Amanda or Bill, because I think that's what the karma thing is. I think fundamentally proof of stake is, look, if you want a voice, then put your fucking money where the mouth is, and I don't think people talk enough about how blockchain generally has manifested that kind of heuristic around decision making. And maybe that's a lot, but if you combine what you're saying with the technology of the proof of stake mechanism, bingo.
Yeah, no, I think from what you've said, so I'm with you, and I think I understand what you're saying from this. What is it that has, what's the right to participate? That's one thing. Why would someone participate?
What do you risk if you participate and you make a self-interested decision?
Yeah.
We're motivated by self-interest or a greater good. Typically not both, and DAOs can maybe allow for that.
Yes, and
You've got to risk something.
I think that's the perfect example. So let me come to the next principle, because I think that's going to talk to that. Now, this is a really important point, because another way to look at risk is, because I've got something at stake, it's because I care there's something in return for me, right? The risk of losing something is the risk I'm trying to avoid for, which you could say is, well, that's what makes you a stakeholder, frankly, because whenever I have stakeholder conversations with groups of people, the answer is sooner or later you get to everyone on the planet's a stakeholder, and that's not that helpful, right? Okay, how do I drill down to the ones that actually really ought to have an impact on this decision? And so if you've got something at risk from the outcome of this decision, you probably are a stakeholder. And so what you're saying is, let's make sure there's enough of an engagement so that when you participate here and the outcome goes whichever way it does, you've got some part in that. And there's the risk side or the reward side, and which side do we want to look from? Which is why it does lead me to my next and final of the 4 principles, which is allowing for and bringing into consideration in your decision-making both intangible and tangible value. Now, a lot of the things you're talking about are probably quite intangible. The risk that I miss out, the risk that I look like an idiot, the risk that, yeah. So there is, the benefit is I've got my tokens. The risk is they go away because I've...
And when I validate the block, my reward is I get more.
And so what you've done there is actually talked very much about the tangible value, because the value of the tokens, there's a clear tangibility to that. And one of the great things about, I guess, the blockchain and so on is to be able to quite directly the relationship between the tangible value. And I guess what I want to say here is we've got to have that, but we've somehow got to accommodate for the intangible value. Because actually, a lot of what drives our decision-making is intangible value, and the risk is we don't accommodate for it, and we find ourselves making decisions that we go, how did I end up wearing a pink shirt? because all the data says presenters wear pink shirts because they get better audience attention. Okay, there's a logical, but every time I look in the mirror, I go, oh God, I don't like the look of that shirt. So the intangible value of how my own experience of myself has been ignored, and now I'm giving a poorer presentation as a result. It's a terrible example, but somehow we've got to accommodate for both intangible and tangible value. And the real thing here is, and it was an interesting conversation earlier around how we know what our customers really want. How do they know what they really want? And sometimes we only know what they want when you've put something out there, they've grabbed hold of it, they've told everybody else and said, wow, this is awesome. And everyone else has jumped on, and that's sometimes the only way, 10 minutes, thank you. Sometimes that's the only way we know what we really care about. But somehow we've got to get to it. Great conversation I had, I didn't forget your name, I'm sorry. Heather, great conversation I had with Heather in the tea break around how do you decide what someone cares about in the dating world? One of the ways is their behavior, because we tend to act consistent with what matters to us, even if we try really hard not to. Even if someone else says, you should really care about this. Come on, large corporation, you should really care about the environment. Come on, when are you going to reduce your carbon footprint? Yes, we really care about it. It's one of our core values, yet everything about their behavior tends to suggest they don't. So somehow we've got to get to what really matters to us. When we can get to what really matters to us, we then want to make sure we accommodate for that in our decisions. The problem is, and especially when I have a room full of data people, yeah, but you can't measure that. You can't measure how happy you are. You can't measure how engaged you feel. You can't measure satisfaction, reputation. Thing is, you can design decision processes where it doesn't matter whether you measure it or not. And that's the key, because the problem is if we think we can't measure it, we think we can't consider it, then we end up making purely tangible-based decisions. So it's critical to get to that, and a fun conversation to have, especially in the world of what does value look like? When we say value, how does this provide value? And I've heard a lot about the conversation for NFTs. So one place of value is the tradability of them, and you might say that's a purely tangible value. But then what does scarcity mean? Maybe scarcity provides for me to be the unique person. I feel special because I'm the only one with that. That's value. Let's not pretend that's not value to me. Another piece of value might be my association with a particular illustrator, and I buy the NFT of their work on one of Mark's events, and my connection with that illustrator is valuable to me. Connection, feeling related to, whatever it might be. So these are things where we really got to get to what's the intangible value, not just think about the tangible stuff. Because otherwise, and I'd say buyer's remorse is mostly driven by a lack of consideration of some dimension of value that's important to us. We drive down the street in our new car and we go, oh goodness, why do we do that? So those are the 4 core principles. Firstly, get a process before you make a decision. Secondly, apply academic rigor. Thirdly, have active stakeholder participation, which can look like many different things, not just put people in a room and get some groupthink. And then finally, accommodate for tangible and intangible value. All those are on the little circle that's on your on your coaster. And I'm going to touch on this very quickly and use Maria's example and also the car example to illustrate this. But hopefully, okay, that's great. Principles are useful. We can see whether they're in or out. We can fall back on them. It doesn't force us into thinking about a certain way of doing things. But actually, what does that look like in practice? The way the book is structured is basically around this thing that I've called the P5 framework. Obviously, I'm a consultant. I like the corporate stuff. So, my pictures all look very corporate. But the core principle here is basically to say can't quite read that, but your journey through a decision starts with a bit of planning. Who's going to be involved? What are we going to do? Some preparation. Preparation is what are the alternatives I'm thinking about? What are the things I'm choosing between? And also, what is this intangible value? What are my criteria for making a decision? If I've got those in a good place, I can then look at how do my alternatives stack up against my criteria. I can prioritize. That's going to help emerge what looks like the best outcome. I can test that. Does that really work? Because often it doesn't. When we start using things like decision science, you've got to get decisions that work in the real world. There's other constraints. And then finally, how do I take that forward? Maybe present that back to the DAO that says, here's the decision, are we good? So Those 5 phrases. Now let's just talk through those with a real example. So Maria's example, and please do jump in if I misrepresent you or I forget the conversation we had. But the conversation we had over lunch went pretty much like, Maria's, I know I've got something with this idea of codifying the movement while I'm creating music, and I know what that can do is create a new way of connecting with a live experience that can live forever, right? Once I've captured that movement, I've codified that, let's say I've minted it as an NFT or whatever, but I can now have that, and a person who came to see me perform takes that away, and it reconnects them with that experience. What a lot of value in that, right? That's a great thing to do. But how do I do that? Do I build my own special suit technology and then become the world's best firm that does that, and people hire me every time they have a concert, and the next time that Bon Jovi performs, he says, come on, we need you, Maria, and we hire your business? Okay, that's one path. Oh, maybe I just build this clever technology, I just get it out there in the marketplace and say, do your own thing. So and there are many other pathways. So the first thing is plan. What's the future that you want? What's the outcome you want from your decision? So for Maria, the outcome I want is, there's a whole new paradigm in the world that people can reconnect with live experiences of music performance. That's the future I see. Okay, great. So she's planned that out. What might some alternatives be? One alternative might be I sell my own technology. Another might be I build a business as a service. Okay, there's a couple of alternatives, and there may be some, of course, there will be some more in there. How might I choose? What might be the things that matter to me? What might matter to Maria, and we didn't go into this, but this is a conversation we might have. Actually, what might matter to you in that? If you think about how might you choose between some alternatives?
I think there's some artistic integrity there. There's the idea that I want to build many. Oh, hello. Hi.
Thank you.
Hello, friends. I'm back here. So what I said was there's the artistic integrity. So I'm coming from the artist perspective. So really the decision I want to make is about, and is that something that stays in my camp, or is it something that I spread around? I also have really great partners right now. It's honoring the stakeholders that are involved at the moment. And it's also this idea of I'm coming from the outside into some of this technology. Something that matters to me is making sure I understand what is happening around. Yeah.
Great. So some examples there of the different kind of considerations that Maria might have when comparing those options. And other things she might add into the mix. I want this to be the way it's done, so I want global reach. So maybe what's the chance for, do we say the scale word again? Scale. What's the word for reach? Or how can we make sure this is the way it's always done? Or maybe, and this is me putting words in Maria's mouth, so apologies, Maria, but maybe it wants to be the Maria method. And in fact, I want that thing to be known as the Maria method forever. And frankly, however that happens, as long as it's known as the Maria method, who knows, right? But you can see in this decision process for Maria, she started with, here's the future I see, where we're headed towards. Here's some alternatives. Here's some different ways I can compare those alternatives. And then Maria might say, let's get a bunch of people actually that are impacted this. My team, some potential other musicians, who knows, right? People that you would call stakeholders. Let's have a conversation around which one of these stack up in the best way possible, and maybe use some kind of decision process in here, decision model that helps stack those things up. What might emerge will be, here looks like the best way forward. You might then test that and say, is that actually possible? That might require this level of investment. Is there an appetite there in the marketplace for that? And then you might take that forward to whoever's going to land on the decision, which might just be you. It might come back to you. But that's the kind of way this sort of thing could work. Just to talk to, so thank you, Maria, for being game and allowing me to use a live example from the room. Just to put a completely different illustration on it, and because Lisa mentioned it, how this can look in a entirely different context is I was buying a new car. And I thought, okay, how am I going to make a decision on which car to buy? The first thing is, let's sit down with the stakeholders. So I sat down with my wife and my kids and my mother-in-law and said, how are we going to decide on the new car? Who wants to play in what regard? My wife said, I don't care as long as you come to me with a final decision. My boys said, oh yeah, because they're 5 and 6, right? We want to go around the showrooms and jump on the seats and play with the windows, okay? My mother-in-law said, I don't mind as long as you consider this factor. So we had a set of conversations, of course, as you might imagine, very quickly, that allowed us to understand how the different stakeholders would participate. We then prepared some options. So, of course, I did the research because I am the one who likes cars, so I'm going on the websites and looking at all the stuff. And, of course, the first thing I've done is set some constraints. We're only going to spend this much money. It's got to have 4 doors, and it's got to be 5 doors because of the kids in this back. So I'd set some constraints. I'd found some options. I took the boys round. We jumped on the seats. We prepared the data, which was, what's the star rating of its safety? And we'd agreed, all as a family, as a set of stakeholders, what our criteria were. So we'd agreed that one of the criteria was, it's got to be interesting to drive. We're going to be doing a lot of driving around with the kids in the back, and if it's really boring to drive, we won't get in the car. It's got to be cool. Ooh, cool. How do you evaluate cool? And our definition of cool was, other people say it's cool, not we say it's cool. Because I can say it's cool, but actually, so what? So it's got to be cool. So there's a few things that became our criteria. After we'd been around, seen all the cars, jumped on the seats, the boys had played with the electrics. Of course, they wanted one that you could make the colour blue inside. I don't know why. We then sat round with a burger and a napkin, and the 4 of us, my wife and the 2 kids and I, and we did a little bit of a matrix. Here's the criteria, here's the options. We looked at the numbers, we had a conversation. How does this one feel compared to that one for driving experience or comfort or whatever? Went through that literally over the course of an hour with some burgers. And everyone said, it looks like this is the one to win. Let's just check that we can buy it. Can we actually get one? Is it available? What's the lead times? Yep. I went back to my wife and said, this looks like the answer. Here's the backup. Second priority is this one if we can't get the first one. That was it, done. Over a very short period of time, we bought the car that came out top, and we've been extremely happy with it ever since. So you can put this kind of stuff into practice, even in something as simple as buying the next family car, if you want to. So, just because I can see the time is ticking by very quickly, and I'm right at the end. So what we've talked about is the 4 core principles of decision thinking, that if we bring them to give us more consciousness, structure, transparency, and collaboration in decision making, we'll be much more satisfied with our decision outcomes. We've looked at, very quickly, a bit of a framework, and I'll give all the cohort companies a copy of the book, which has the framework explained in more detail if you want it. Back to you. What, from hearing this, what has, I'm definitely looking at George because I know he's going to have quite some very helpful opinions. What's something that's resonated from what I said? What have you seen that you've gone, I hadn't thought of that? Or also, what have you seen when you got, that's rubbish, what the heck are you talking about? And what's a point maybe that some of you might have? Any thoughts? Oh, thanks, Lisa. She's going to run the microphone around.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a fascinating thing you're talking about, and I really enjoyed that, so thanks. I've just got a quick question, if that's okay. It's just with relation to trial and error and living your life and your business through learning, through getting things wrong. So if we're all the constituent parts of basically failure, if we are all those things, I was just wondering what the science kind of says, if therefore it's correct to get things wrong, okay, it's okay to get things wrong and it's correct because we need to learn. So I was just wondering what the science says about basically the freedom and the importance of getting things wrong and why it's important not to try and get things right by making the correct choices the whole time.
Good question. So I'm not sure I can talk to what the science about getting things wrong is, but how when I hear your question, the kind of things I think of are actually, if learning from whatever decision you're making is important, then you want to build that into, let's look at ways that will help us learn from this decision. Let's design a decision process that we know we learn from. Let's build in a decision process that says, at this point in time, let's just check in and make sure if it hasn't given us some of the things we said we wanted, what was it about that? Often I'll design quite, as you might imagine, loop decision processes that say, let's pause, check back in. How did it go? Did it go the way we thought it would or not, so that we can learn? Just because if you believe my fundamental, there is no objectivity, there is not really a right or a wrong answer. There's just something that might not achieve the objectives you set. Let's work out why that was. And the learning in that point, I would apply to how do we make the decision as much as what were the things that we had on the table in front of us. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but hopefully.
Yeah, it goes some way to answering it. Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else? Any other points, things that you've taken away? One behind you, Elisa, for Amanda. Thank you.
This is for George, but I'll just talk a little bit about the OCM DAO, because when I read this, it's like exactly what we're doing, and we just stumbled into it. So we use Noun's DAO infrastructure for all the voting. We've done 5 rounds where we gave out like 55 ETH. We have the small grants committee. We had 17 people apply to be on it. They can do up to 5 ETH in grants. They literally did a 3-hour spaces, did like candidate statements. It was like this whole election process. And then we had 1 MetaGood rep. And it's just really, we talk about seek views on the process. Like every single proposal that comes through has its own Discord chat about it. We do a weekly DAO chat, so anyone can present if they're not good at writing, or they can find a way to communicate best with the community. And then the structured, facilitated process to engage in meaningful. That's what we're doing with the whole DAO. And it's interesting though, because it's people voting with their NFTs, right? So you could have someone with 100 NFTs, you have someone with one NFT. We've happened to be fortunate to have one of the most engaged groups. Typically, we're getting like 2,700 votes, which is the highest of any community on Nouns DAO. And we thought, everyone kept telling us if you have a DAO, people are going to be apathetic after first couple of votes. But so far, we have not seen that. We thought about how to implement incentive systems with bananas or other tokens to motivate people to vote, but that has not been our problem so far. So it's been good. But it's just funny, just reading this, I was like, wow, like, this is exactly like what Web3 is enabling through Discord and now this Nouns DAO infrastructure to enable active stakeholding, because everyone's a stakeholder if you're an NFT holder. So
yeah, that's great. And I think to George's point, you've made your stake by what you've got at risk in the conversation. And so that's perfect. One of the things, of course, many of you may be thinking, this is all blindingly obvious. Of course it is. It's actually how we make decisions unconsciously. What we're trying to do is bring it forth so that we can see what's missing. And certainly I know I'm super keen on another conversation with you, Amanda, about the details of what that looks like inside, partly because I'm not a great believer in voting. Voting is a yes or no kind of conversation. So how can you actively participate in something a little more subtly different than voting, with maybe a bit more of a sliding scale or some different alternatives that lead to the right result? Because the challenge with the vote is if I vote yes and the answer becomes out no, now I'm on the wrong side. So to me, it feels like a wrong decision. So that's just an interesting area. And actually, and I think I've got to shut up, haven't I? No, was that another question? Okay, yeah.
Then you've just got two more.
Yes, yeah. So, yeah. So to reflect on that, and actually, it was a point I wanted to make earlier that came from George's comment earlier around purpose. For me, purpose-driven decision-making starts with the purpose, and that gets encapsulated in things like criteria. If our purpose is causing communities to do good for the sake of doing good, then there's something in the decisions, the criteria that have us go, let's make sure those are the things that float to the top when we start looking at why we do something. Great. So I think you're the second one, aren't you? Is that right?
Yep, just you first.
Thanks. Okay, Edgel, and then we'll go to Alex.
Two important questions.
Okay.
One, how did you come to the decision to use Bon Jovi as an example?
That's a very good question. Maybe it was because I did karaoke on a cruise ship once and I sang Living on a Prayer. Who knows? So there's probably something in my decision history that led to that example. Whew, tough
Curious.
question.
And then what was the car?
The car? Oh, okay. So I'm standing here. You're all looking at me. You've all got some view of me. What car do you think it was? Oh, no. It's a BMW X1. So there we go. Sorry to disappoint if those of you thought I would drive something bigger. Back to your questions, Edgel.
I just wanted to point something out based on your analysis of how your DAO functions to George, your kind of earlier panel notion, but basically you're able to achieve the same process that you would otherwise do with your family, trustless with strangers. I think that's the point.
Yeah.
They're aligned by some community. You don't know them personally, but you say purpose, value, whatever. They've got to be organized by value or it'll break down. Correct.
Yeah, you don't have there's a certain relationship you have with them, but it's different from the relationship with your family. Great. Thank you. And I'm just going to leave this slide up on the screen because I was told earlier, I think it was Jared, at lunchtime, that said, don't scan random QR codes because he's got one on his pullover, but do scan a random QR code. If you want to scan this code, it's just like a little diagnostic, answer you a bunch of questions that will just point at a few things from the principles that might give you some insight. So I'll leave that one with you. That's
I'll
me.
invite you to drop the QR code.
I will put the QR code in the
chat
launch
so
pad. Yes, I will
everyone
definitely do
can,
that. That's
jump
the
on
easy
that as well. And actually, I, since doing one of Paul's workshops, have invited him to every program that I've run ever since, because I did buy a car and I was married once upon a time. My decision-making process was, I really want a Porsche. I'm going to get a Porsche. And I actually just called him that afternoon and said, I just bought a Porsche. I'm not married anymore. So Active stakeholder engagement is important. So thank you, Paul. And yeah, Paul is with us for the next 3 days, so please ask him more questions, particularly when we're using exponential technology with decision making. I am a big fan of frameworks. Thank you, Paul.
Great. Thanks all very much.